Hi everyone, we're really excited for today's Square episode where we are going to be discussing and celebrating Women's History Month. It is a month we have celebrated in this country since 1987. It's a time where we celebrate women's accomplishments, but we also take the time to reflect on the roadblocks and glass ceilings that are still getting in our way. In that spirit, we have invited some really wonderful guests onto the show today to have a rich conversation about leadership in design, the power of education, and breaking barriers. Before we get started, we're going to take some time and quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Tanya White. I'm a design researcher within Hugo, which is Corgan's Research and Innovation Department. And Anita, why don't you introduce yourself?
Of course. My name is Anita Delgado, and I have been with Corgan for 13 years. I am a project designer and architect, as well as a senior associate.
I'm Lindsay Wilson, president here at Corgan and interiors market sector leader.
I'm Nida Ali, and I've been working at Corgan for 1.5 years now at the Education Studio. I'm an architecture and media art graduate.
Okay, so let's kick off this conversation with a very important question, which is why are you all here? Why have you pursued a career in the field of architecture and design? And specifically, how does your identity as a woman enhance your role in the field?
You know, I'll jump in first because I'm the only interior designer amongst this group and the oldest. And part of the choice for interior design, I think, did have to do with being a woman. So the field, absolutely a passion for art and design and creativity and wanting to be a part of a team. But I will tell you, I was just drawn to the interior design studio. At the time where I went, they were separate. And I mean, if I really think back on it, that's just where I thought I should go, because that's where all the girls were. So I'd love to hear from you, Anita, choosing the path of architecture instead of interior design.
Okay, so there's a funny story behind this. I actually decided to be an architect when I was 7 years old, as crazy as that sounds. And I think the main reason was that I had the benefit of growing up in 4 Latin American countries by that age. And I always observed this disparity between the social strata and very much reflected within the architecture. And to me, being an empath, I suffered for homelessness, and I wanted to be part of that change. And I felt that also liking drawing and art and all of that, all of the creativity activities, architecture would be the perfect path. I did make a bet with my grandmother, because my grandmother, she told me, "Oh, sweetie, don't marry yourself up to that only choice. You know how many grandkids I've had, and they've changed their opinion of what they're gonna be." And I said, "No, I will bet you $20 that I will be an architect." And so now I realize that I should have asked for a little bit more. But I did commit to it. And I don't think at that age I really realized where was I allowed to be in society's eyes within the career. That was something that I discovered later on as I entered the School of Architecture, because like yourself, Lindsay, I did feel that there was a push to have women in a certain location versus men, and I had to undergo a lot of tough moments there with professors back in Puerto Rico that did not believe that women should be in architecture. So.
What about you? You are recently out of school and starting your career. What are your thoughts and perspectives?
Well, I actually did not know I wanted to be an architect when I was growing up. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and then we moved to Pakistan. And then Yasmin Luri is like one of the first female architects in Pakistan, and she's a social activist. So growing up, I was like, okay, she's kind of cool. Maybe this is something I want to get into. So then I started getting into architecture because of the way she designed her buildings geared towards social justice and looking out for impoverished communities. And that's how I got into architecture.
That's so interesting. Well, thanks for sharing. Okay, so now let's look a little bit outside of ourselves. First, I want to share this excerpt from the Women's History Proclamation that comes out every year in honor of the celebration. This year it reads, "During Women's History Month, let us honor the accomplished and visionary women who have helped build our country, including those whose contributions have not been adequately recognized and celebrated. Let us pay tribute to the Trailblazers for daring to envision a future for which no past precedent existed and for building a nation of endless possibilities for women and girls." What stood out to me in this was the term trailblazer, which I just loved. It evokes passion and this like fearlessness, but I want to know, what does trailblazing mean to you? And if you can tell us about a trailblazing woman that you admire, and they do not need to be in the field of design either.
I'd like to go first.
Yeah.
Behnaz Farahi should come to mind because she's an Iranian architect, but is also a media artist, and she works more towards creating technologies that like are incorporated in not just spaces but around the body. So they're more human-centric than they are about the environment. So I think her work is something that is inspiring to me, and one word that comes to mind would be confidence for me when I think of trailblazing.
Yep, absolutely.
I would have to say, when I hear the term trailblazer, the woman that comes to mind is Isabel Allende, the Latin American writer. I really admire her. She, by career, she was a reporter, and she eventually became this trailblazer writer that broke barriers for Latin American authors, female authors. Very kind of late in her career, I would say, and she had so many setbacks, including political persecution, having to flee her own country, and then the tragic death of her young daughter. She's somebody that draws inspiration and strength from all of those points that would probably bring anybody else down, to create this wonderful, wonderful story. So when I think of her, I would say not only courage, but also resiliency comes to mind.
Love that.
So I will throw Melinda Gates into the conversation. For me, she illustrates a couple of things that I have really strong opinions about. One is an incredible partnership between her and Bill. It would be so easy for her to be in the background, but instead she seized this opportunity that they have as a family to really change the world, and she really stepped into that role. I think to give a voice with such a precise message of what happens when we educate women globally and economically in the world, such a clear message, and then to put their money and their power behind it, I think she's a trailblazer.
Yeah, she's they're all very inspiring. As we're talking about women and this kind of pipeline from education into the workforce, what is coming to mind is everything that's happened in the last year with COVID. I think this is officially our COVID anniversary today.
Is it?
Yep, of
We're not going to make that a day.
We're not going to celebrate.
But there are some pretty astonishing stats that are coming out about women in the workforce. One that I pulled that I had to reread it twice was in September of 2020 alone. So in 1 month, 865,000 women dropped out of the American workforce. Additionally, the share of mothers who have left the labor force is 3 times that of fathers. And these trends are even more dire for women of color. Black women, Hispanic women, they are facing disproportionately higher rates of unemployment and kind of this exodus out of the workforce. And so the question is, how might this impact the field of architecture and design, and how can we facilitate women back into the workforce?
I have a lot to say about that. And we were talking behind the scenes.
I know.
I have I had this experience. I know that a lot of us as mothers, we had this experience of being dealt a really hard card to play last year. I remember that when we were starting all of the closures and isolation and really freaking out about COVID, that's when I was about to give birth to my second daughter. And so it was a moment of a lot of fear, but it was also a lot of growing and shifting and adapting and learning how to do things in a different way. So when I returned to work, we were still all working from home, and I had this newborn to take care of. I had hired somebody to take care of my 2-year-old because I knew that was just out of the question that I could do both things at once and actually be able to pull a full day of work. But I have so many pictures of me typing with my baby right here. Or eventually I started holding her in her little carrier and typing and drawing and coming up with sketches and then having Zoom and Skype meetings. And she became the part of the meetings, So I think one thing that was very helpful to me was my team supporting me. That was of utmost importance. Them being able to adapt themselves as I was adapting myself to the situation and being encouraging, not belittling my accomplishments or, hey, you're busy right now, but being flexible with me. Maybe you will do it in a little bit more time, but you will get it done. And so I felt that made a humongous difference, and that there's a lot of businesses that don't deal in that same way. They don't have that flexible mindset, and maybe they are not empowering of women that are facing those situations or many other situations. So I think I feel bad for those who had to leave the workforce due to that.
Yeah, and I think the last time I read, about 85% of women have children, so that, and then women make up about 50% of the world. So
Yes.
It's a lot of women who are going to experience that at some point in life.
Well, and I know we've read a lot of the same articles, Tanya, that the recovery prediction puts women's recovery of coming back into the workforce years behind, because a lot of men lost their jobs as well during COVID, but that the recovery for men regaining employment will be 2 to 3 years faster than women getting back up to those same numbers. The statistic is that the percentage of women in the workforce now is back to where it was in the late 80s, which is crazy.
Time travel.
It is time travel of the wrong kind. And I think what's going to be really interesting is, can we be a part of innovative solutions for getting women back in the workforce? There's a very cool company down in Austin called the Prowess Project that is specifically targeting women who've been out of the workforce. They were founded before COVID, and now she's just seizing this. Her name's Ashley Connell, who founded it, seizing this opportunity to really put together highly skilled workers who've been out of the workforce with flexible employment that employers are looking for. So that's just one tiny example. I think there's a ton of room for creative ways to get women back into the workforce in jobs that lend themselves to flexibility if that's what's needed. But it's a daunting hill to climb when you read those numbers.
It's like unfortunate because not just architecture, but every job and workforce was lacking like ethnical, cultural, racial, and like gendered perspectives, and now it's like we're going back to that instead of like progressing. It feels like we're regressing with those perspectives.
Yeah, and this kind of brings up another topic, underrepresentation in leadership. So Harvard Business Review recently reported that only 4.9% of Fortune 500 companies and 2% of S&P 500 CEOs are women. 20 years ago, there were just 2 companies on that list that were run by women. But at the same time, and Lindsay, you shared this research article with us yesterday, shows that women tend to score higher than men on most leadership skills like resilience, motivating others, and building relationships. So there's a kind of a disconnect that is in tension. Why do we think this is? And how do you think women are uniquely positioned to be leaders?
So, I mean, the research shows, and most of our personal experience would echo, that once women are leaders, they flourish in those roles. So for me, as much as we can dig into the path, it's the disruption of the career path that I think it's not a lack of women in higher education. It's not a lack of women getting advanced degrees. I am the only one of the 4 of us without an advanced degree in this group. So we are not missing those opportunities. It's not at the entry level positions. We see it here at Corgan. We are 50-50 at all of our kind of entry staff level positions. It's this disruption of the leadership path. And that's what I'm kind of interested in. I wish I had all the answers. I certainly don't. But that's where I think we can dial in and potentially figure out how to make a difference in the shorter term.
I think there's also a misconception that as we rise within our careers, it's almost parallel that you already have your family and your kids when you're ready to assume a leadership role in most cases. And there's this misconception that you won't be able to devote your entire time to this because you have other responsibilities. And I think that's one misconception that we have to erase, because we're very good at being efficient. We're very good at doing 15-hour work days and like putting them into this, right? So I think we have that ability of being full-time moms, full-time spouses, as well as full-time professionals. We have, you were saying, naturally we have a lot of qualities that makes us good leaders. We are nurturers by nature, and I think if we're gonna deal with daring leadership, that is something that is very needed. We tend to be a little bit more comfortable with vulnerability than maybe a lot of male figures out there, and we tend to create this very impactful and meaningful connections with our peers and the people that we mentor.
I do think it's tempting, and I'll speak for myself, to take yourself out because you're afraid you're not going to be able. I mean, there's tons of research about men are overconfident in what they're capable of often, and women are not as confident in what they're capable of. And I think sometimes right at the moment when you could kind of grab an opportunity, I get scared and you don't want to overcommit because you'd rather undercommit and over deliver. So I do think this, you said confidence at the very beginning, and I think confidence is such a huge part of it. I mean, sometimes I feel myself physically wanting to push some of the women that work here of like, go, like you are the one, do it. But there's that, oh my gosh, I'm committed to this. I've got kids, I've got a partner, I've got all these things. And we, instead of going for it, we might be like, ooh, there'll be another opportunity. But there might not.
Yep. I feel like years ago there wasn't enough opportunities for women, but now there is, and it's just the fear of like trying to go for those opportunities. And I think that's the push we need.
Yeah.
So you said daring leadership,
Yes.
and I thought of Brene
Our
Brown,
girl.
and it couldn't be a conversation about women in leadership without Brene Brown. She's here in spirit.
Oh, yes.
She's a leading researcher in vulnerability and leadership in general, and she's also, I'm pretty sure, a homegrown Texan.
Yes.
What do you think it means to be a courageous and kind of fearless leader?
Honesty, maybe loyalty.
Yeah.
from the people you work with, from the people you build relationships with. I think that's, in my opinion.
Yep. That is one of Brené's pillars. Honest,
Yes.
like just having being honest is the kindest thing
Yes.
you can do in many relationships.
Clear is kind.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Brené-ism. We do. There, another, you can go Brené Brown and then Glennon Doyle at the same time. I love her too. She has a great quote, which is, the braver I am, the luckier I get. Like, how true is that? So, I mean, fearlessness to me is that a fearless leader is brave, but also vulnerable and inclusive. Because, I mean, it's such a frustrating thing for me when people aren't aligned on this. I mean, great leaders tend to only be considered great leaders because their teams are awesome. And then in turn, they end up looking like a great leader. So, there's never been an army of one that people said was fantastic. You have to have a team who really, they're the ones that rise to the occasion and multiply out that impact. So a fearless leader is not afraid to be at the back.
Yes. Yeah. I believe that you definitely have to be comfortable with vulnerability, both within yourself and also within your peers. Because that, like she says, that's the path to courage, right? In our industry, we are within the creative innovation industry, if we're going to see it that way. We cannot allow ourselves not to be vulnerable, because it's at that moment of feeling uncomfortable that the best ideas arrive. And so we need to give space to ourselves to feel that fear and to race through that fear with courage. And we have to allow the space for others to do the same. Otherwise, we will never be innovative.
Absolutely. I could not agree more that
I'm glad we have that recorded. Yeah. I'm going to need to listen to that again, Anita. That was right on.
Taped up on the wall. The vulnerability is so important, especially if you want people to, craft an idea, in their privacy and then bring it to you, right? Even if it's not the idea, there's an essence of it that you could still use, and you don't want to squash it or...
Of course. And there's so much value in failure, right? We fear failure, but failure often leads us in the right path. And if you think about it, the word failure kind of dissipates once we start acting upon it. It's just a mere setback where you take a pause, reassess, and come up with a better idea. So I think we have to lose fear of that, fear of failing.
I think failure is what builds your confidence.
Exactly.
The more times you fail, the more confident you get with every opportunity you get.
Yeah, because you fail and the world did not come to an end, right? It was all okay, and you were in fact one step closer to the right answer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've reflected on some of these roadblocks and glass ceilings that get in our way. What are some hopes that you have for the next 5 years, let's say? We don't have to think of 20 years out. 3 to 5 years for women.
Diverse perspectives, I guess. Yes. And that's what I'm really pushing for and hoping for the next 5 years, that we'd have different voices, not just different point of views, but we would actually listen and hear people from different backgrounds. Yes. Is something that I'm hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. Some intersectional perspective. Yeah, absolutely.
Overall, I would be hopeful as we try to get women back in the workforce. We really think about jobs in terms of what are the skills that are needed, soft skills and the hard skills for the job. So you talked about empathy at the very beginning. Is this a job that needs empathy? And then you go looking for the person who might be someone who's been out of the workforce for 2 years and they might be the perfect fit, instead of starting with the notion of who that person is and then fit them into the job. I think it's going to take that type of thinking to really get to get people back in the workforce, to get diverse perspectives around every table. And I just hope to see more women in leadership roles across organizations. I think it benefits the organization, and that women put their hand up and go for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also like to add, I would like to see more women empowering women. I think that's very much needed. We understand what we go through. I think we have similar perspectives, and I would love to see that happen more.
More conversations like this,
Yes,
perhaps.
yeah, of course.
This has been a really great, enriching conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. If you are watching this on YouTube, it is the abbreviated version. For the full episode, tune in to our audio podcast. Thank you so much, and happy Women's History Month.